mode.
All right. Want to welcome everybody to today's webinar 3, the final broadcast. So good afternoon and welcome to NABCA's Crisis Communication Planning webinar series. This is the third and final webinar that ties it all together. It is titled Organizing and Writing the Plan, which offers you ways to organize the planning information that have been presented for the first 2 webinars, identify stakeholders, and finding ways to communicate with them. So before I begin, I just want to take a moment and address a few housekeeping notes. Again, this is the final webinar. It will last about 1 hour. However, if there are lots of questions and if attendees don't mind, we may stay on longer to address them. If you have questions, please type it in the chat window in the lower right corner of the screen. Hopefully you have that visible where you are. At the end of the presentation, I will come back and ask the questions for presenter Carol Gorney to answer them. Also, if you think of a question after the webinar has ended, feel free to email me. You should have my email address from the announcements about the series, and then your question will be answered via email. As with the first 2 webinars, this presentation is being recorded and will be available for playback later. So check the NABCA website and look under the resources tab to find the webinars. Okay, so this concludes the announcements. I'm going to introduce our speaker, Carol Gorney. Carol is a nationally recognized expert in media relations and crisis management and communications. She has been a consultant to government, corporate, and nonprofit organizations, including the defense contractor Lockheed Martin and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, for whom she has developed a 3-day workshop on environmental crisis planning for use worldwide. She is accredited by the Public Relations Society of America and is a member of its prestigious College of Fellows. So with that, Carol, I'm going to change presenter, and let's hope we have success and pass the presentation on to you. So let's see. There we go. I see it. So I think you have control, Carol.
Thank you. As Maggie just said, this third and final webinar, I want to do a quick review just so that we can tie everything together. I mentioned to you in the last 2 webinars that I suggested that we organize your plan into sections, with part 1 covering the basics like table of contents and what is the purpose and the scope of your plan and so forth. Part 2 covering definitions. What are crisis categories? What are the types of crises? What are the levels? Why those levels are important? And what are the determining factors that account for the different levels? And you're going to see that tied in today when we talk about scenarios. Part 3, structures, talking about the membership and the contact information and so forth for your crisis management and crisis communication teams, all the contact lists of people that you need to get in touch with, facilities that you'll need, resources, and so forth. Now, what we're talking about today is basically part 4, which are the crisis scenarios. We're going to talk about some specific situations and show how those situations are defined by levels, and we're also going to see how you place the internal communication procedures and the external communication procedures in that. Sorry, I hit the wrong one. Again, I want to review just really quickly about determining crisis levels. The factors that affect that have to do with severity of injuries or numbers, deaths, property damage, service disruption and how long that's going to be, impact on your image, your reputation, your relationships with various stakeholders. If other entities get involved, sometimes when you're in a weak position, when you have a crisis, this is like an open invitation to your critics and so forth to jump in and try to make you look bad. What's the political fallout? Anticipated media interest. And we also talked last week about past history, the fact that if you've had a similar kind of incident can affect people's perceptions of your organization. And finally, where the particular crisis occurs. If it's on your site, if it's on government property, if it's on a public property or public site, these all enter in helping you determine those levels. Okay. Also had the definition of those levels, and basically what I said was the amount of external help you need to call for, the amount of involvement there is, and the amount of external communication that you deal with determines what the levels are, so that the worst level, the most severe level, level 3 or 4, require a lot of substantial help and or external communication, and usually at this point, certainly your crisis communication, crisis management teams need to be activated, and there may even be for your type of organization some potential involvement by state or local officials. All right, let's get to talking about specific kinds of crisis scenarios. I've picked employee deaths or injuries because this is the type of scenario that almost any organization, regardless of what its purpose is or its mission, are at some point going to face this. You put it under health and safety, and then under that you list what it is: employee illnesses, deaths, or injuries. And here we're going to talk about a level 1. You'll see a little bit about why I chose level 1 for this. To begin with, when you set this up, I suggest that you also have a brief statement that underscores your organization's policies or position toward safety, protection, maintaining property and so forth, in good working condition, whatever the situation has to be. In this case, we say your organization is committed to promoting a safe and accident-free work environment. Okay, so you make that statement, that claim up front. Then you list and describe what the scenario is. In this case, one of your organization employees, subcontractors, if you have such a thing, or you have someone working, doing, say, renovation work on your property or whatever, customers, if you have shops, stores, visitors who may be taking a tour of your office or your facility. If any or one of those individuals becomes seriously ill while on site, and it's apparent that it's not work-related, that it's not something, if it's an employee, it's not something that they were doing as part of their work, or that it's a cause that's related to your organization in particular. Okay, so it could be a heart attack, it could be someone has a seizure, whatever the situation would be. So that's the scenario for level 1. What I want you to notice in this is, number 1, the numbering system. I made this 18.0. If you remember back when we were doing the other parts of the plan, we started with numbering 1.0, 2.0, and so forth. So whatever the number is when you get to the scenario section of your plan is what you put in. And you'll understand why this is important. This is a way for you to organize your plan and a way for you to retrieve specific sections of the plan that you need for specific kinds of situations. You also have in there a statement in each scenario of your organization's policy related to that specific type of crisis, and I mentioned that earlier. And finally, you have a description of the situation. So that's standard, and you use that same format all the way through for every kind of scenario. Now, 18.1 is internal communication procedures. And here you specify what is going to happen, who does it, and who gets called or who gets contacted. In this case, when you have the employee, the customer, the subcontractor, the visitor suffering from a serious illness or condition that could be life-threatening, such as an apparent heart attack or collapse, the person observing the incident should immediately call for an ambulance or call 911 and then report to, and you add in what are the appropriate position titles of the people that this individual should notify. Then the person in charge at the location, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but that person, where the situation occurs, offers assistance to emergency medical personnel and tries to determine the cause of the illness to assure there is no contagion involved. Now, contagion could be a situation. You want to be sure that the individual doesn't have something that might be, that other employees or might endanger other people who are in the building. The person in charge notifies whoever you think is appropriate. Remember, this is your plan. You determine who does what the positions are, and who gets what the line of command is, if you will, and who gets notified. And that person should also provide some kind of an assessment of the situation, explain what happened, what the person was doing, and so forth. Other people, probably your personnel or human resources person, if you have such a position, keeps workers apprised of the employee's condition. Also, it provides updates on the situation and on the condition of the employee or the other person, and prepares an incident report for the file. And the communication director prepares a response-only statement in the event any media inquiries are made. Response-only statements are very typical. I used to keep those. If something happened, I'd write down a few notes on what I would say, stick it in my desk, top drawer of my desk, and if a media person did call, I could just pull it out. But I was not going to volunteer that information. It wasn't really necessary. External communications, contacting the individual's family, whether it's an employee or a person who is visiting or who is a subcontractor or whatever, there needs to be some effort made to contact that person's family or next of kin in order to offer whatever assistance is appropriate. Now, it's a little bit more difficult when it's someone that you don't know, and that might not be possible. But certainly with your employees, one of the things that I strongly recommend is that you make sure that you have contact information on next of kin and family members, telephone numbers, addresses, names, and so forth. Human Resources also maintains contact with the hospital to keep abreast of the employee's condition, or that could be someone else. Keep in mind that this is your plan again, and that you can determine what steps need to be made and by whom. You can also add to what I've already put there. What I want you to notice here is the numbering of the subsections within each scenario. You have 18.1 for internal procedures, 18.2 for external, and you're going to be adding sub numbers to this as we go through and talk about what else needs to be in this section. I use the term person in charge. You can be much more specific about that, or should. You might have plant managers, you might have store managers, whatever the title is of the person, you can indicate that, and you could even say in your scenario, if it occurs here, this person. If it occurs at another site, you can specify what that site is and specify what that title would be of the person in charge. For other notifications that I've listed in there, you add the appropriate titles. You'll notice that I bold-faced titles of people who had to do something, and I do that because it's easier to see. You can go through and you can look and you can say, oh, okay, that's me. That's what I have to do. It just makes it easier to locate. But you don't boldface the people that they contact or that have to do other things related to just being contacted. Offering assistance includes describing what symptoms the victim showed to assist in determining the nature of the problem. Did the person grab his chest? Did they have a seizure? Were they a froth? Was there something coming out of their mouth? Were they having difficulty breathing? Whatever. That's the kind of thing I mean with offering assistance. And when you train your people, when you have orientation and you discuss the plan with your people, you can explain the kinds of things that you mean when you want them to do that. Another explanation, even though, and I mentioned earlier that a level 1 type of situation involved no outside assistance. In this particular case, you notice we did have to call an ambulance, okay? But even though you did that, the likelihood of media interest is very slight because it will be likely viewed as just a typical EMS call. Be aware that media do have radios, police radios, fire radios, and they monitor those, and they're always listening for calls and for codes. So if it's just a heart attack or something like that, they're usually not going to pay any attention. All right, let's look at a level 3 for the same kind of scenario, health and safety, employee deaths or injuries. Now, what we've done here to make it a level 3, we've upped the ante, if you will. We've made it an on-site job-related accident that results in serious injuries and death to multiple employees, not just one, but many. Extensive local and possible national media coverage could be expected depending on a number of things. Where you are located, if you're located near major networks or Philadelphia, for example, New York, Los Angeles, you might get feeds from the local affiliate going to the national. So that is possible. Again, you do internal communication procedures 20.1. In this case, you have to call 911 for medical assistance. You have to call local police because there were deaths. You need to call the police, and you need whoever the person is that's in charge or witnessing the incident has to secure the area until they arrive. And again, also assist emergency medical personnel as needed. And then the person in charge also notifies whoever, but be sure in incidences like this, in these types of levels, that the communication director is one of the first persons that is notified, because he or she needs to be aware as quickly as possible so that they can begin assessing the situation and determining what kind of communication needs to take place. Probably the COO or the board chair, whoever is the head of the agency, notifies legal counsel. In this case, if it's the COO, he would then have to notify the board chair. And again, whoever, local managers, whoever, determine if there is any danger to other employees, whoever is there, security, whatever your situation is, say it's in the warehouse or it's in one of the stores or in your office, who would that person be that would determine if there were any other employees, danger to any other employees, and would also interview witnesses to try and determine the cause of the injuries or death. This is more likely to be done by the police, but you want to be sure that you have those employees available to talk to the police or to medical personnel if they need to question them. Okay. What we have, I'm just giving you some ideas of the kinds of things that you need to think about when you do your procedures. As I've said, it's up to you to determine how you want to do this or what you want to include. But these are things that you certainly need to think about. Here you have the COO or designee convening the crisis management team, and these are the kinds of things that the team needs to do in this particular situation. And you'll note when we do another scenario how those procedures or those goals to achieve differ because of the nature of the situation. And here they have to determine the cause of the incident and decide on preventative measures. Was there something that was done that could be prevented in the future, determine when the work site is safe for employees to return, arrange for counseling of employees as needed. There may have been employees who were on site who saw the accident, saw people being killed or injured. That's very traumatic for them. They may need some post-trauma kinds of counseling and so forth. There may be friends of the workers, co-workers who are upset by the situation, and you need to include the counseling for them. We talked about that when we were discussing the kinds of procedures and policies that you needed to have in your plan. You need to determine compensation and appropriate intervention with families of employee victims in addition to just notifying them. The communication director would have to convene the crisis communication team, formulate an initial public statement, prepare talking points for a later news briefing if that was necessary, and assign media monitoring almost immediately. HR director, so here we have what you do at the scene and who you notify, what the crisis communication team has to do, what you have to communicate internally, and then, which is what we have here with the HR director, and keeping records of what happened and posting information on the website in ways to get a hold of employees. All right. I also suggest as part of your plan that you have some assessments. These are the things that both the crisis management team and the crisis communication team need to assess. Okay, how bad was the incident or issue, and how bad could it become? Proactively mobilize resources to respond to expected impacts. Okay, what can you do to minimize some of the impacts that might be coming, and quickly begin to address the strategic consequences of the impacts. Now we get to external. Here's where you notify the families. You contact the hospital to keep abreast of what's happening so that you can brief whoever needs to know. It might include state and local officials. Question might be, why would you do that? Because they might be called by media and you don't want them to be blindsided. This is often a good reason for contacting local officials. Just give them a heads up. That way they have your perspective and it saves them having to try to speculate or to look like they don't know what's happening. The communication director, and in cooperation with the various crisis teams, issues a statement confirming what is known about the incident, providing detail as it is appropriate and can be confirmed, draft statements for social media, website postings, plans for hourly, daily updates, and so forth. All the things we talked about in the last webinar, which you need to do when you're dealing with social media. And then when sufficient information can be confirmed and background information is compiled, communication director schedules a news briefing at the designated media briefing area. Okay. More than likely, at least one of these briefings would be necessary, hopefully before the, depending on when the accident occurred, trying to think of the deadlines for the newspaper and for the television stations. Again, more external procedures, and you can read these. What the COO or board chair or both would need to say at the news briefing, keeping in mind that expressing sympathy to the victims' families are the major thing that you need to say initially, in addition to just telling what happened. And then, of course, the communication director monitors internet and the traditional media. All right, what to notice in what we just covered. In accidents or other incidents that involve deaths, precautions should be taken to secure the area. I had that in there. That's to protect both other employees who might be injured in the same way, Let's say you have, it was an electrocution and there's some wires loose. Okay, obviously you've got to be careful. You don't want anybody to go in there and suffer the same fate. You also need to preserve the scene for the investigators. You want people tramping around and so forth. You've probably watched enough detective and CSI programs and whatever to know that that's a very important thing, so that the investigators get an uncompromised site to work with. And thirdly, the number of people involved in handling the level 3 incident, as well as the duties and the number of contacts, all increase with the severity of the situation. So I gave you a comparison between a level 1 and a level 3, and you could see how much more complicated and involved the level 3 was. After you've done your internal and external procedures, you begin to place your lists, and media lists are one of them: newspapers, radio stations, television stations, and your online editors, if that's applicable. If you have any influential online editors, bloggers, sites, or a lot of the newspapers, when you send something to the newspaper, it gets posted also on their online news section. So I suggest that you just make a list of all the media that could possibly be involved, and that you just cut and paste that media list each time in each scenario, rather than trying to say, well, we'd only send it to this one or that one. You can pick and choose out of that, and it makes it a lot easier for you. You also need to add specific contact lists here. Okay, if you need to notify state and local officials, you need to know who those are and what's their contact information. If you have it all written out and on the page, you don't have to spend a lot of time looking it up. All right, and finally you have what the media will want to know, and here I've covered a lot of the kind of questions that they're going to ask. Obviously, numbers of persons killed or injured. They're going to want to know the names and titles of persons that were killed or injured, and you don't do that until, as you know from the protocols we've already discussed earlier, you don't give them that information until you've notified next of kin and you've confirmed it with the hospital or whoever. You can tell them where they were taken for treatment and refer them to the hospital for the nature and severity of injuries. If there are any witnesses, you may be asked about that. Don't speculate. Say, well, that's part of the investigation. We'll be looking into that. They may want to interview some of those witnesses, and you can agree only after the employees have been, or witnesses have been counseled about the ramifications of doing that. And if they choose to be interviewed, that's fine. Don't use a gag order. Don't say employees aren't allowed to give interviews, because there's always the parking lot and the living room, the television people, and that will make you look bad. It'll look like you have something to hide, but you can do a job of counseling your employees, and if they want to, give them some advice on what to say and what not to say. And finally, they'll want to know the cause of the incident. If it's not obvious, don't assume or speculate. And you can always say what is being done to determine the cause, what is being done to determine what happened, and so forth, rather than trying to be specific about it. And then say that the information will be provided when verifiable. Time of the accident, if anyone was to blame. This is another thing media always like to, they may not ask you specifically who's to blame, but that's kind of where their questions are going. Don't answer directly, just say the cause of the accident will be part of the investigation. Don't repeat negatives, especially. Was there negligence involved in this incident? Don't say, no, there was no negligence, we will investigate to see if there was negligence. Don't repeat that word. Find a positive way to say it. And then finally, any similar incidents in the past, and we talked about that, about how that can affect the public's perception of your organization. If there was or if there were other incidents, try to put them in context so that and show the differences between what happened then and what's happened now. If the answer is no, stress your safety records, safety training, and procedures. All right, so I'm just putting a list here of things that you will be asked. You can do that. You can even add things to this again. The questions that are asked will vary, again, depending on the nature of the crisis. Here's a sample initial media statement. It doesn't hurt to put that in there. Why? You might not be the person who's the communication director, or the person who does this might not be available. It might fall to somebody else. Even if it is the main spokesperson or someone who's used to talking to the media who's involved, this just saves time, because then you can just fill in the blanks. You've given at approximately, you provide the time. Today we learned that, you state the nature of the incident and where it occurred. All that we know at this time is that, and you put in the number of employees and so forth. This is a very standard statement. You'll hear this if you watch television during the day and they break in for an emergency story and they have somebody standing up talking about what happened. This is very, very much the way that it plays out. So you include that at the end of your what the media wants to know. What I want you to notice on what we've just done, and what I want you to think about for what we're going to see, is that you can borrow from your own scenarios. Shakespeare said never a borrower be. Well, actually he said never a borrower or a lender be, but don't believe that you can't be a borrower. Some of the procedures and messaging in the previous scenario that we just used on deaths or injuries can be used for a number of different situations, but deaths or injuries will occur for different causes besides work-related accidents, and you can use them, but you're going to have to borrow part of it, but you might have to make some additional information. For example, if the deaths were caused by armed robberies, and I did some research and I found that February 3rd, March 5th, there were store clerks shootings in Chicago and other liquor store clerks. And I think February 16th also, there's been a number of those during robberies and so forth. So not beyond the realm of possibility. Collapse or extensive damage to buildings, warehouses, offices, stores during storms or other destructive acts of nature, or workplace violence. So there are different ways, besides accidents, that death or injuries can occur, but some of the procedures are going to stay the same. You have to think about some other aspects. For example, armed robberies, you're going to have to talk to the police. So while each cause of death scenario requires the same internal, external communication procedures, there are other considerations you have to take in mind. Armed robberies raise different issues about store and public safety, for example, and require you to communicate with the police. Deaths from weather-related incidents require you to communicate about both the victims and the damage to facilities, as well as the impact on operations. So what we've done here is we've taken parts. We've said, okay, deaths of employees only. We've said damage to facilities only. And now we've mixed and matched. And I'm recommending that you have a scenario that combines both. Okay. So let's look at a property damage scenario, and then we'll talk about how we can combine those two together. All right. Extensive tornado damage. This is a level 3. I'm just going to start right with the worst case. Extensive tornado damage to your organization's 200,000 square foot warehouse and destruction of most of the product being stored there. In addition, 2 of your largest stores were leveled by the same tornado. Okay. Now, in a lot of the scenarios, after you've listed what the specific scenario is, I'm sorry, I'm doing the wrong way. I often put added information that is important for you to consider in dealing with that particular situation. In this case, we're talking about a tornado, and we're talking about damage to facilities. One of the things that's helpful in determining levels of your crisis is the damage codes. All right, and in this case, damage codes deal with the amount of the damage, the amount of disruption, and how long it will take to get back into operation. In this case, damage 1 could be done in 3 days. Restoration estimates are 4 to 15 days for damage code 2, 2 to 6 months for 3, and 6 months to a year for 4. You can actually make your own. You can add another one in here under 3 and make that 2 weeks, whatever you want to do. But the idea is that helps you determine, all right, what is a level 4 would be one where you're talking 6 months to a year to replace the facility. So your internal procedures deal with that. And again, you're dealing with what happens immediately, who notifies who, so that everybody knows what has happened. That's the first part of your internal procedures. And you have here some things that you normally might not have. For example, the communication director prepares community calendar announcements for television and radio. One of the things you have to deal with immediately in this case, when you have damage to facilities, you have to notify your workers not to go there. Okay, what do you expect them to do? Where do you expect them to go? Letting them know that there's been this issue. That's the first thing, and the people who have to deal with that are going to be your communication director, human resources, and of course convening, since it's a level 3, convening the crisis management team and the crisis communication team. You have, after all, completely destroyed the warehouse and all the product that's in there. So your crisis communication or crisis management team needs to assess damage. You can see if you compare this list with the one I showed you earlier with the deaths, they have totally different requirements of what they have to look at and what they have to do. And that sort of underscores what I've said before in the last webinar about the fact that one size does not fit all. Okay, so you have cleanup, insurance, and you can add to the list all the things that you would need to do if that happened to you. All right, what to notice in these? The organization and format stay the same for the plan. This is the point that I'm trying to make as to how to organize and how to format the information for each scenario. The procedures are added or changed as needed to compare or to complement the particular situation. All right, now since the tornado has also, this is something else that often comes up, a variable. Since it has affected other businesses and residents in the area, there may not be much media attention, at least for the first day or two, on you, because you're not the only one that's been affected by this tornado, most likely. So the communication director's duty will center on working with the crisis management and crisis communication teams to assess the situation, what are they going to do, how are they going to continue operations, and so forth. They're going to stay, she or he needs to stay in contact with NIMS. That's the National Incident Management System, or FEMA, or state officials, whoever's in charge of the communication about the tornado. Because when there's a huge disaster like this, most of the control and the communication is done by somebody else other than your organization. Making sure internal communication with employees, board members, vendors, distributors, shop managers, etc. are maintained. Posting stuff on the website and social media, because people are still people interested in you and what they need to know about your situation. This is where they're going to be able to get it. And then monitoring the media and the internet. All right, again, what to notice about all this is that you may not be in charge. All right, more than likely, if it's NIMS, you're going to have, or FEMA, they're going to have their own public information officer. So you're going to need to stay in contact with them to be sure that anything you need to communicate gets communicated through them. All right, let's finish the scenario. Add other internal and external procedures that you think are necessary. Specify who's responsible for doing what. Include your revised media and contact lists to fit this scenario. Finish with what the media want to know, and prepare a suggested initial statement in case media do call or your organization has a chance to speak at an area-wide news conference. Sometimes that happens. They'll bring everybody in. Now, let's just for a second, before I move on to this, talk about the fact that given the nature of your business, people are not going to be there in a tornado, in a situation that has wide effects on others, like hospitals, daycare centers, senior centers, those types of facilities. Your loss is not going to be considered a major event from the standpoint of people not being able to get liquor, or people not, or you're losing a lot of your product. What will be an issue will be the impact it will have on the revenue that you generate for the state. And so those are the things that you're probably going to have to concentrate on in doing your communication messaging and so forth, especially the one-on-one, not so much through the media, but the one-on-one that you conduct with officials. All right, so let's now talk about what if. You should also have a scenario that involves employee and or customer visitor injuries and deaths and in the warehouses and or stores. So let's suppose that this tornado damage that you had, that it was during the daytime and there were people working in the warehouse and working in those stores. So now what you do is you review the procedures for employee injuries and deaths from accidents, or it could be from acts of nature. You combine those with property damage scenarios, analyze the difference between those scenarios and this new one, and add or subtract procedures and contacts. Okay. So what I've tried to do is give you a methodology for making the changes from one thing to another, or combining two things when two things are involved, and making it as easy as possible for you to say, okay, this is what we have to do and this is how we do it. What I also want you to notice is that crisis communication plans, and your crisis management plan for that matter, are living plans that you can keep revising. So once you've got the basics down there, there's nothing to prevent you from saying, hey, I just thought of something too. Let's add this in. And that's particularly important because it allows you to revise without having to rewrite the whole plan. You can add and change very easily using this format. All right, what else? Procedures stay similar regardless of the cause of property damage. So if it's fire, wind, ice, floods, lightning strikes, whatever, you're going to have many of the same procedures. What will change is whether, as I've pointed out in the tornado, whether it also affected other people, other residents or businesses in the area, and to what degree. All right. So if it was localized just to you, then the ball is in your court, and you're going to have to do more initial communication. If it's terrorism or sabotage involved, that's going to bring in federal people more than likely, and that's going to up the um, the requirements for communication at a time when you're going to have to say, because of national security issues or because we're investigating it on the federal level, we can't divulge that information. So that's going to change a little bit what you can communicate. And it's also going to make it more, it's going to make it even more important. It's going to raise it to an even higher level. And if vandalism is involved, obviously there's police and those types of issues. Well, the point I'm trying to make is that the devil is in the details. All right, when you're doing crisis communication, you need to think of all of these variables. And the more you can anticipate variations in the scenarios and prepare responses to them, the better prepared you will be. And here's a couple of examples. This probably doesn't apply to most of you. It is an actual situation, and it could be. And I'm using it just as an example to show you how variables change levels and can affect the importance of your communication. If you have a level 1 where you have an agent shoots an unarmed drunk minor who's running away outside of a licensed establishment after throwing bottles, breaking windows, or committing other aggressive acts. The wound to the leg was superficial. The minor, a Caucasian, was treated and released from the hospital within the hour. He's being held by police on charges of underage drinking, vandalism, and resisting arrest. All right, you have a lot of variables here that make it possible for the public to say, well, the agent might have been justified, the agent might have feared for his safety, the wounds were superficial, you know, all of those kinds of things, and the fact, and you'll see why the Caucasian is important. There are other variations to this situation. Shooting an unarmed adult with a history of public drunkenness and violence. Again, justification. Shooting of an unarmed minor running away with stolen liquor bottles who has a juvenile delinquency record. All of these things are important in your communication to the public and to the media. Now, a level 3 or 4, an agent shoots an unarmed minor outside of a licensed establishment. The minor, an African-American student at a local college, was suspected of underage drinking. He was shot twice, once in the chest, once in the thigh. He was admitted to the local hospital in critical condition. Details on why the agent shot the student are not yet available. Okay, all of these things, the race, because of the sensitivities and the things that have been going on since last summer, the severity of his wounds, the fact that there's no indication that he was doing anything illegal, although it was suspected that there was no proof at this point that he was engaged in underage drinking. So there's a lot of questions here that make it a level 3 or 4 very much more serious situation. Other variations to this is that whoever the minor was, go back to the Caucasian, permanently disabled or dies, alleged allegations that the agent used unnecessary force, and those are posted on social media. Someone posts video of the shooting online, the traditional media report on the video, and use images from that video on their online newspaper. So again, all of these variations need to be taken into consideration. And you can, in fact, do exactly what I did here. You can put your scenario, and then you can put variations under here for you to consider. You don't necessarily have to write up each one, different procedures for each one, but by keeping those there, it gives you a kind of a one-up on if something like that does happen, then you're kind of ahead of the game. All right. Think about the fact that your plan is a checklist. It's a checklist of all the procedures that will need to be followed in any specific crisis situation. It is a checklist of the individuals who are responsible for carrying out those procedures. It's a checklist of the contacts with whom to communicate. It's a checklist of what messages should be communicated, and it's a checklist of the resources that you'll need to deal with them. Checklists help assure that in the midst of any actual crisis situation, nothing is going to be neglected or forgotten. The worst thing you can do is get into trouble because, oh, we forgot to do this, or we should have, I thought you were going to do that. That type of thing that often happens. So by having a checklist, adding to it, subtracting from it, whatever, it is a really, really good way to save time and a good way to assure that nothing falls into the cracks. Some final recommendations I want to make. Keep your plan, a form of your plan, digital, as well as some print copies of the plan. Separate digital files into folders and separate them by folders by sections. That way, appropriate parts and scenarios of the plan can be emailed or distributed to personnel that need to have it when a particular situation occurs. So you don't have to distribute the whole plan. They can just get the parts that are appropriate. Place printed pages in plastic page protectors and put the entire plan in ring binders. And use marked tabs to help locate the major sections of your plan. When you're doing the scenarios in particular, you can put defs and 20.1, whatever. It makes it very easy if you have a def, you go to that section, you find that tab, you pull that section out, you have everything self-contained that you need to work with. And then make several folders for key personnel, your COO, your spokesperson, your communications director and board chair, or whoever you just designate needs to have them, should have a complete folder somewhere close to where they can get to it. By having it digital, it can also be, if they're away from their desks or away from where the plan is, it's easy for them to access that from wherever they are. They may have to give advice from a distance away, and that way they can look at the appropriate section, use the information, and do a good job of counseling or consulting, giving information. All right, one last reminder. Your work isn't finished until you've media trained your spokespersons, you've oriented your staff. Once your plan is done, you need to get your staff together, you need to sit down and go over the entire plan, making sure that everybody knows, because if you say, oh, well, just read the plan, I can tell you, they don't. So this way you go through it with everybody that needs to know, and you can answer questions or whatever, and you can do that in a couple of hours, but it definitely needs to be done. And finally, you need to test your plan. You can do that through tabletop exercises where you have a hypothetical scenario and you give everybody, this is what happened, and then you say, okay, what do we do first, who does it, whatever, and you test to see if they really understand their role and they know what they're doing. I'm going to say that's the end of my formal presentation, but I hope it's just the beginning. I hope that I have inspired you to undertake this process and to do the kind of planning and do the kind of thinking ahead and so forth that you need to do to really come out on the good side of all of this. So I thank you very much for participating. It's been, I know, a lot of material for you to try to digest and whatever. My contact information is there. I do a lot of crisis planning for people. I work with them and to try to get it done so that it's customized for their particular organization. I do media training, and I also do the orientation types of things that I've been talking about and the tabletop exercises. So if any of you are interested, I know working with Maggie and so forth that some of you may be. I look forward to hearing from you. I'm going to turn it back over to Maggie, and again, thank you very much for your participation.
All right, Carol, thank you so much. We've got some questions, one of
Oh, good.
which is with HIPAA privacy rules, how does the designated person get appropriate information about an injured employee from the hospital?
Well, what I am saying is they just they'll tell them if they're in serious condition or if whatever, but anything other than that, if the media want to know, they just simply ask, they send the media to the hospital. But I know from working with hospitals that they also have protocols about what they can say, and they can give out conditions if you have a reason to know if you're the employer or whatever. That's usually not a problem.
So, as the communications person, if they're asking you questions about employees, one of your employees, and that employee is at the hospital, all you say is this, of course, after family have been notified and all of the other things you mentioned before.
Right, right,
You
right.
just defer them to the hospital and let the hospital answer
Uh,
questions about the
let,
condition.
right, and there's very limited information that the hospitals will give or can give, but they can give a condition. They will give you a condition report.
Okay. All right. Now, this is another one that I have. Now, we didn't really talk about it because we focus specifically on crisis communication plans, but I know some organizations or maybe some of the agencies participating in this call also have continuation of operation plans or COOP plans.
COOP
And
plans, yeah.
yeah, and how does this fit into a COOP plan? Obviously, what you're talking about um, involves a lot more detail, and you wouldn't take what you've developed in a crisis plan and chunk it in a COOP plan, right?
Well, what I'm talking about is what you normally do at the beginning of something when you're first having to deal with a specific situation and you're having to communicate what happened and so forth. The and I think somewhere in all that, when I was showing you what some of the situations are what the crisis management team has to deal with, one of the things at some point what they have to deal with is how to get operations back and determine how long it's going to take and so forth. The COOP then picks up at that point and says, okay, what is the most important situation? What is the most important operation that we have? What do we have to maintain and what do we have to work on first? There are some things that might have to go, at least temporarily. So they determine what's the most important operations that need to get back online and how do they do it and who's going to do it and so forth. So it's like the next step after you've dealt with the specific crisis itself.
Hmm. Hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does to me. So if anybody has any questions they want clarified, please chime in. Um, so you had mentioned as one of the examples that you may not be in charge. So if it's a disaster or a situation, forgive my disaster word, if it's a situation where the federal government is involved and you're kind of playing maybe fourth or fifth fiddle, let's say. How do you still remain involved, or are you just totally shut out in situations like that, even though it's at your facility?
um, I kind of suspect that given the nature of the people that the businesses of the people that I'm talking to, I sort of alluded to that earlier, that because they're involved in liquor control and so forth, unless there's an issue where there's been, I'm trying to think, what do they call it, looting and so forth, or where there may be suspicion that there may be underage people getting access to alcohol because of the damage to the building or whatever. Um, in those kind of cases, if there's some kind of public security issue or whatever, they would have to be involved, and they would probably be called upon to either provide the information to the PIO, who would then do the communication, or they might have a news conference where several different agencies were represented and spoken, talked about what they were concerned about. Otherwise, I think given that that there are probably more important considerations, such as getting hospitals back online and working, and getting other important services available, they might very well just have to communicate through their website and through social media.
All right.
I'm not sure I answered that question the way.
Okay.
Uh, yeah,
Okay.
I think it's important that they do keep in contact with whoever is running the show, just so that they know they're there and what their issues are. And as I said, for some of them, it might be the impact that it has on the budget, on the state budget, if they lose their operations.
Okay. All right, there's another one here. With the increase in cybercrime, do you have an example or examples of businesses handling a data breach well or poorly?
Well, I'm trying to think of the one where they didn't tell their customers that this had happened, until
Was
way later. I'm not sure who that was. If that was Target, or I don't want to blame anybody, but that's an example of not dealing with it well. I think the important thing is that you need to get the word out right away, so that everybody, and find a way to notify your credit card holders, or people who've used credit cards, customers who've used credit cards, so that they can take whatever steps they need to do to protect themselves, change the credit cards or whatever. I can't think of anybody who I can't think of any examples of this happening where they did either a really good job or a really bad job of it. It was just basically, this is what happened, and um, I'm kind of, if I think about it, I'll try to do what I did with the hostile media. I'll send you something,
okay.
because I'm really not. I didn't do any specific research on that.
Okay. All right. Well, it's a little after 3, and it doesn't appear that there are other questions showing up. So if anybody, again, has any questions, feel free to email me. Your question will be answered via email. I too want to thank you all for participating and coming to all of the webinars, those of you that have. I'd also like to put in a plug for the survey that I'm going to be sending out within the next day or so. I know I sent one, first one, second one, and I'd be grateful if you guys can take the third survey and give me your feedback, because it's important to us, NABCA, and our members, to make sure that, what we're doing for you is beneficial and helpful in what you do. And so we appreciate your membership with us as well. So that wraps it up. Thank you guys for, again, participating. Have a super Wednesday and a great rest of the week. Bye.
Bye.